This is Dave Monk of Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial. And this week I've been lucky to have my niece from Australia, who's been here for 4 years, and she's visited before she goes back to Australia after 4 years. So I thought it might be interesting to have her to say, give some of her reactions to being here. And so it's Marilyn and Tomlinson, and I'll let her speak to what she's doing, and yeah, okay, Marilyn.
Hi, Dave. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Dave, for having me back again. This is my 4th appearance on your show, and the first one was in excess of 20 years ago. So that sort of shows you a bit of a timeline there. As Dave said, I'm part of the Australian family for him. My mother is Dave's younger sister. And I was always keen and interested to travel as I grew up. And my first time overseas at the age of 22 was to America. And I said to Dave, I'm going to fly into Chicago. Can you pick me up and take me to where you live? And that sort of started a bit of a ongoing here and there over the years, where I'd pop in, manage to see him for a few days, and then take off to whatever's next. And then, as he said, 4 years ago, I was lucky enough to be selected to work over here. I'm attached to the Australian Embassy, but I'm actually work for the Department of Defence in Australia. And so here I was working for the US Department of Defence. And I've got a long history with the military. I didn't really want to do too much more study after high school, so I ended up joining the Australian Navy and spent 12 years doing logistics and supply chain in that, and then got out of the service and went into the civil service, where my career went down logistics, supply chain, procurement, strategic procurement, all sorts of things. Still in the maritime domain till recently, when I was selected to come over here and do international relationships. So the US and Australia works very closely in the military environment. Close allies, and we've had over 100 years of working together in whatever combat situation. And I've been working hard to help that relationship continue into how many ever next hundreds of years. So it landed us in Washington, DC, and we live just over the river in Arlington. And it's been amazing to live in such of a busy and lively city for a couple of years before COVID hit and changed the way we did things for a little bit. But yeah, and we head home in January.
Okay, but you've been visited a lot of places around the world. I think.
Yeah.
I think I heard you talking about visiting other countries, and you happen to be ginger, or redheaded, and part of it comes from my grandfather, who was ginger. When he migrated to Australia in 1914, he was used to swimming in the calm waters of the Channel around England, and he would try to swim between two headlands on Bondi Beach, and he would have to be rescued, and he would lie in the sun and enjoy the sun, but he, being rather susceptible to sunburn, he had a rough time, but he had to learn how to handle a different country. And you're, uh, we call you Blue.
Yes.
That's I don't know where it comes from.
No, there's a bit of a history. I'm sure if I Googled it, I could find out. But in Australia, used to get very upset. As a child, I am the only redhead in my family besides, the great grandfather, who obviously wasn't alive when I was born. But for some reason, my mum just had an indication that I'd be a redhead. My sister's not, and unfortunately, growing up in the 80s, kids were pretty cruel, and there wasn't that many redheads around. So I used to come home crying because they'd be calling me carrot tops, and I'd be like, Mum, carrot tops are green. Why are they calling me carrot tops? And then the other thing is I'd walk past a group of older gentlemen who'd be sitting down having a coffee or reading the newspaper, and they'd go, "Hey, Bluey." And I couldn't understand why are they calling me that? But it's a term of affection and endearment. It's a compliment. As I got older, I realised that my hair is more of an asset than a hindrance. But it has meant I approach certain countries differently, or have my eyes maybe a little bit wide open in respects to the fact that it's not the most common hair colour.
Yes, I had Indian people here who found red hair very strange. They hadn't encountered that.
And in Australia, it's starting to get more prominent. The US, it's not really an issue, depending on what parts of the country you go in. I was reminiscing before. I spent a couple of days in Tanzania, sailing across from Gibraltar one time when I was in just sort of spending some time around in Europe. And they were pretty impressed with my hair. I don't think a lot of people there had seen, and I wore it out, not thinking that it would, cause any problems. And it didn't. But then in other countries like Muscat, Oman, in Dubai, I'm a bit more mindful, and I normally cover up and tie it back. Japan even. I get quite a lot of compliments, and my blonde-haired, blue-eyed son is also very complimented on. So it's part of your DNA, and you just handle it. And I normally try and work out what the issue is, whether it's a positive or negative, and then try and adapt to the culture. Because
your father was kind of ginger too, I think.
Well, he would grow a ginger beard. But we're such a multicultural country in Australia, and quite acceptive of, all nations. So I try to be mindful when I go to other countries to do the same thing.
Yes. Well, that's enough for here. You came here when you were single, and have married, and you have a partner, Kieran, who is more or less a Green Beret person, and he was skydiving. So we've had you on WEFT with skydiving videos where you put together perhaps 30 or 40 people, so they hold hands and a daisy, and then have to escape from that. You have 7 planes that take you up in the air. And so it's part of your family life is to skydive.
We haven't done much of it recently, but Kieran and I did go to Southern California in Perris Valley in 2019. Luckily, COVID wasn't around there. And we both were on the Australian record, which is 130 people joined up. So that was a great achievement. It was awesome to do it together. It's something we enjoy. I dare say we'll get back into it when we go back to Australia. But we've actually found here, noting our times and travels, and that COVID hit, we spent a lot more time in the last 2 years getting out and about. So we've gone to a lot of the national parks across the country, done a couple of really cool road trips, particularly through Utah, and around our local area, and even driven up to Vermont. it's been a great opportunity to see the US's natural wonders, and I'm often complimented that I've been to more states and places than some of my friends who were born and bred here.
Yes. You've probably seen more of the US than most people who are US citizens.
I think that's the Australian way. We sort of just get out and about. We have a work-life balance. We try to work hard to do that. We're a pretty active family. There's only the three of us. And yeah, you mentioned Kieran. He's now retired Army. So it was quite nice yesterday for Veterans Day. Our son had to learn about it at school, and he had the choice to write a letter to someone to thank them for their service, and he wrote a letter to both mum and dad for our service in the military, which I thought was rather sweet.
He's all of 6, I think.
That's it. He's 6, but they need to learn and appreciate and understand that stuff. We have Veterans Day to a degree in Australia. It's Remembrance Day, same date.
And it's Memorial Day.
It is, yeah.
So
and we stop for a minute. Stop for a minute at 11 a.m. in the morning and remember.
Yes, 11th hour of the 11th day. It was armistice for World War I. And I did a little thing on WEFT, and it was interesting that someone in Chicago was listening to that program and called in this morning.
Oh, cool.
We don't have a Nielsen rating, so we don't know whether people are listening or not. So it's always fun when somebody calls in like that. You have obviously a young fellow who is with you, and I think he's experiencing the US in a different way than he would probably experience in Australia. Are there some differences that you can say something about?
Yeah, very, very well. He sounds a little funny, with no offense. He definitely has managed to adapt quite a bit of a strong US accent from being with his peers and friends and going to school here, which we think is absolutely gorgeous. He refers to a lot of things in the way you would in the States. So trash, sweater, tomato. So his terminology is what he's grown up with here. And in turn, we sort of have adapted to that a little bit as well. It'll be interesting to see how long that takes, whether it'll stick with him when he moves back to Australia, both the accent and the way of saying things, because I suppose he'll have to be confident in himself to go, no, I said sweater, you mean jumper, but I'm okay with calling it what I want to call it. But here we're very lucky in Northern Arlington. It's quite an affluent, well-educated area. He's got a really good network of friends. We're also not far from natural wildlife and hiking trails and mountains. So he's managed to have exposure to a lot of outdoors, not so much hiking in the bush, but hiking more in the forest. Even our backyard, he's grown up with an area where chipmunks, squirrels and deer in his backyard are common. And now we're going to go back home and he's going to get creepy crawlies and snakes, all of which aren't really good for you, and the local kangaroos.
Yes. I was at my sister's wedding and I was walking around and there were kangaroos hopping through the bushland.
Yep. And we're sort of close to bush where I don't think they'll come into the town, and not like the deers do here, which is pretty amazing. We had a deer sitting in our backyard this morning, just hanging out, which is awesome. Some of the other differences, the education system is a bit different to the way Australia is. I think they're a little bit more play-based for the junior years in Australia, whereas here they're pretty big on getting into the reading, writing, and the arithmetic STEM very early, and I can understand why. He's learnt a lot, but we have some fun with him because of his age. Our school year in Australia is from January till December, whereas here it's from August or the end of August till June. So he will actually only do 4 months of first grade, and in January he will start in grade 2. And we're expecting a few challenges, probably more along the lines of sitting still in class and knowing when to raise your hand or not jump in, because he hasn't had as much time in the classroom to sort of cement that, thanks COVID. But educationally wise, I think he will slot back into the slightly older grade without too much hassle. So that's a bit of a difference here. He's quite an older kid in his year at the moment. Some other funny things is he played soccer, he knows about baseball, he's become very much a fan of ice hockey, go Capitals. Not so much of the NFL, that really he didn't take to that, and not so much basketball, but he doesn't know what cricket is. He doesn't know what netball is. He knows the allegiance to the Pledge of Allegiance, but he doesn't know the Australian national anthem. So we've got a bit of work to do to bring him up to speed on his real nationality.
Well, you have a dog, and it seems to me the Australians are very worried about disease and movement. So your dog has to be quarantined. Tell us a little bit about Charlie.
He does. Charlie's our golden doodle. He came with us because he's sort of like our second child. He had to no quarantine on arrival in the US. He just had to have a rabies shot, which was fine because Australia doesn't have rabies, and they want to keep it that way. So about 8 months out from us choosing that, we need to go home, Charlie started a bit of a pretty strict regime, going to the vet every 5 to 6 weeks, having blood drawn, having to be on certain medication, having to have a number of shots, all to the Australian government's requirements. And if any of that paperwork doesn't align, he's not allowed in the country. So we've been pretty careful to make sure that's followed correctly. And then it used to be any animal that came into Australia had to be quarantined for 4 months. Now it's down to 2 weeks, 14 days. And so he arrives, he gets off the plane and goes straight to a quarantine facility in Melbourne, which is in the south of Australia. And they do a number of tests, draw some blood, keep watch of him for the 2 weeks. And then he's allowed to go and socialise with other animals and be back reunited. So it's not as bad as what it used to be, but even travelling from mainland Australia down to Tasmania at the bottom, Charlie can't just jump on the boat and go down there. He has to quarantine prior. So even Tasmania still has quite strict requirements because they're only a little island. There's only 500,000 people, and if something gets in there, look what COVID's done. So the quarantine requirements in Australia are pretty strict still. And even when we arrive, we will have to declare that our shoes and boots haven't been tromping through farmlands or in major agricultural areas. And if we do, we need to then go and specialised wash them before we're allowed to leave the airport. So it's a little bit different than turning up at LAX and just having to deal with the TSA.
Yes, your husband Kieran has been doing a degree while he's been here, and it's been done at Armidale, which is a college in Australia, and he's doing it by correspondence. Has that been an okay thing to do? Because we're doing more of that here. We're doing things by Zoom and by the internet. And I wonder, do you have any comment about his doing that sort of programming?
Yeah, so he actually started a distance education program before we came over here. He was doing it while he was working, which a lot of people in Australia do. And I think the whole remote study thing was actually quite well established in Australia. You can still work. You have to fit in your study around everything else, but the subjects aren't as expensive, and they don't go into, you know, buckets and buckets of student loan, which is a unfortunate part of what I think the system has got going on here. So he finished that degree, and it didn't really affect him at all because the lecturer would post the lecture. They'd be available online at key times. So he may have to call in at, say, this time of night, or jump online at this time of night, which is the Australian morning. But that was manageable. And I think the only downside is one subject he had to take the exam he had to start at 11 p.m. in the evening. So that was a little bit of a, you know, oh, will my brain function that late at night? But he managed to finish his undergrad, and he's also completed his master's while he's been here, all through the organisation, which really, when COVID hit, it didn't get affected at all. Which compared to some of the other universities and colleges here, it was a dramatic shift to move to the virtual learning. Even going back to Jackson's schooling, I said before, Arlington is quite affluent and well off, and has got some, you know, really cool people working the boards here, and the process to get the kids up and running onto a iPad. That happened pretty seamlessly. You were given the tool, and you were given the resources. But who I felt for the most was the teachers. They had been so used to having that student engagement and being able to communicate with their kids, and now they were being told to not only work the technology, but work it and maintain control and keep progressing these children a very small age. And I think one of our disappointments here was, particularly our state compared to some of the other states, is children were back at school in other places a lot faster than what they were in this region. And so, you know, keeping a 6-year-old entertained on a screen for 7 hours a day, it's just not going to happen. So we were very happy to have him back in the classroom. Whereas getting a 38-year-old to sit still through a lecture virtually, I think Kieran managed that a little bit better. But he's had a number of conversations with other students who are either undertaking studies at, say, George Mason here or even Georgetown. And the US is, his friends are quite surprised at, I suppose, the price of the masters that he got, and also the flexibility that the Armidale University afforded them. Sorry.
That's Charlie. So I have to say that Australia is the same surface area as the US. It has a big desert in the middle, and people are often isolated. So they have gotten used to a rather famous correspondence school, where often a nurse or a caretaker on a station would be in charge of the family children, and they would have a pedal wireless and report into the main central school. And so that has some of these connotations of being able to do things distantly. Not every.
Yeah, I think the bit that we weren't prepared for is in a lot of those instances in their early days out in the bush. You've got one of the parents, particularly mostly the mum or whoever who's not out doing the farming, being around to help facilitate that a little bit. And as they then get older, well, this is how school is. You sit at the desk, you listen to the radio, or you now have the internet and the iPad and the computer. and you may do it, but 3 or 4 farms are all got their kids sitting around the one area. So you've got your own little makeshift school, even though you're not technically going to a school as such. And the quality of education can be just as good as if you're in the middle of Sydney. The downside that we had here, particularly with COVID, is no one else's job stopped. Like everyone else turned to teleworking. So I was going in the office every day, and then all of a sudden I wasn't, but I was still required to, get the work done and do what we need to do. There was obviously some flexibility in that and some leniency, but I know a lot of people didn't really have that. And I think that was the hardest thing, that if you're going to get a student to sit and watch an iPad for 7 hours, you're going to need to be there to watch them. And that wasn't, possible in some instances. But even another difference with my own self, with the way we operated, is being in an international role. Hardly anyone in my area ever teleworked. You might take a day once in a blue moon to work from home, but otherwise everyone was in the office every day. And it's sort of seen, well, you're working international. How can you not be productive? How can you be productive if you're not in the office? And so when COVID decided to, rear its head, that just wasn't possible. So all of a sudden, the US DOD, that is traditionally, not teleworking friendly, had to flip, get the resources, make sure people were set up and in a position where they could have access to laptops and external whatevers to be able to log on. And then the work continued. And my boss quite often says that it's actually been really successful. In some cases, we're more productive than what we were in the past. Unfortunately, probably to our own detriment, because sometimes you can answer the phone at 5 or 6 or 7 because it's in your house and you just do. Whereas in the office, you've left for the day. So I think what a number of organisations are finding, particularly in where we work, is the frown upon of doing teleworking won't be there in the future. And I think that's a good thing for the US on a whole, because that's one of the things that is a little bit more flexible in Australia. And that I think allows us to have that little bit more work-life balance. And then, it's okay to not be glued to a desk. So I think that's one of the upsides of the whole last couple of years.
Well, I listened last night to a Sierra Club presentation about the rail trail that you see we have, and prairies and things like that. But it was amazing. The photographs were with flying equipment above. It was so you had aerial photographs. There were things that you could visualize that you wouldn't be able to do if you didn't have the technology.
That's an area that Kieran's really interested in. He has a couple of drones himself. We can't fly them around here due to the restricted airspace, but the ability to take photos from such a height and capture it so clearly, or even things in movement, the technology is amazing. So that's definitely a pretty cool leap in technology that's happened.
There's also a move towards group involvement. It used to be that you got to be somewhat of a specialist, but there's often the person with the drone is working with other members of a team, and that often brings in engineers together with artists, and it's a different cat than it was a few years ago. Yeah, we're not hearing you now. Did you mute?
Sorry, I had to turn something off on the stove. Yes, sorry, I did mute. Yeah, the community that we're part of that does the skydiving and all the and jumping, and a lot of them disappear into the high Alps in Europe, and the drone capability and radios to be able to communicate with people at the launch sites and things like that has allowed such footage that a camera positioned on a small camera positioned on a helmet or on a arm as you did your aerial work wouldn't be able to show the true beauty of what was going on. So that's a whole nother area that people are dabbling into now.
So what experiences did you have in the West when you went to? Did you go to Bryson, some of the canyons? Did you?
Yes. So I'd probably say the two. We called it the Wild Wild West trip. So that was one of our favourite. We flew across to Salt Lake and picked up the car, and then we road tripped down to Arches. That was our first stop in Moab there, and we got up at pretty early. It was like about 4 a.m. and ended up into the park. We weren't alone. There was a lot of others, and we hiked in about 2 miles and then sat under the picture that most people see of the arches or the arch itself, and sat there and watched the sunrise, which was pretty cool. It didn't rise. It sort of it hit it as like the arch was sort of here, and it hit it that way as the sun rose up. But the vast land was amazing. And then we spent a few days wandering around different parts of the arches. And then literally on the other side of the road, which is mind-blowing, you have Canyonlands, which to me is a lot more like the Grand Canyon. And it is just so vast, you need days to go through it. So we took the opportunity to take a helicopter ride over a fair bit of it and see the I think it's limestone. I may be wrong, but there's stuff seeping out of the ground, and the in the sense the river that's running through the middle of Canyonlands is a bit green. It might be sulfur actually. And so we got to explore that, and we drove around there and sort of went to a few of the edges of the rim. And then we jumped in the car and took off down to the next stop. We went through Capitol Reef, which was one of the other of the 5. Stopped there for a little bit, just picked a hike, tried to keep it around the 2 mile mark because Jax's legs only go so far, but we got to see a fair bit. And then the next day we pulled into Bryce Canyon, and it was 12 degrees when we took off hiking. We were pretty rugged up. It was pretty chilly, but the sun on this landscape, it was my favorite. I'd only seen pictures of it in the past. The snow was still on the caps. The little men, like hoodoo gurus they call them, but sit everywhere was amazing. And a little slight deviation from Bryce was a state park, which sort of showed us the similar landscape, but just not with the same reds and oranges of the zone. And then when the sun hit, it was just extraordinary. So that was a fun couple of days. And then we went down to Zion, which once again, completely different landscape. So to have all these different types of national parks within 400 miles of each other was phenomenal, and a bit of a bucket list, because not many people had experienced that. And so from there we ended up, our hotel in Zion was pretty much in between the valleys, so the sun would set on one mountain and then rise up on the other, and just extraordinary, breathtaking scenery, but you only sort of see in pictures. And then we drove to Vegas, which was a completely different end to the trip, but it was a means to an end to fly out. And as you said before, I originally, when I first came here, was single. Well, Kieran and I had ventured to Vegas over 10 years ago now, and we saw it through adult eyes. And then this time round, it was actually quite extraordinary seeing Vegas through our 6-year-old's eyes. So there wasn't any gambling or drinking. It was all about, let's go see the light show, or let's go see what they're doing in this, the Bellagio with the water show, and the big signage and the lights and all that sort of stuff. So we didn't venture out to the Grand Canyon or Hoover Dam, which I think we've both done before, Kieran and I. And we decided that we need to leave some stuff for Jackson to do when he's older and he can pay for it himself. So, but that was a pretty awesome trip for us, and one we will remember fondly. The other one we did, which also hits a number of bucket lists, was we got to fly into Jackson Hole in Wyoming, and Kieran had managed to map out, I think it was about 6 or 7 days all around, where we actually stayed inside Yellowstone, anywhere from the Lima Valley to Mammoth, down to Old Faithful. We went up into Montana, had some lovely people look after us for an afternoon. We fed us and gave us a bit of internet for a while, because Yellowstone's still pretty scarce of that. And then ended up over in West Yellowstone before we came back down to Jackson Hole via the Grand Tetons. And so once again, phenomenal land. It'd be awesome to see it in winter. We saw it it wasn't fully towards the end of summer, so it wasn't that hot. But just the wildlife, like you turn the corner and here's a big buffalo just walking in the middle of the road, or the bears, the brown bears are protecting their cubs and walking up into the forest. So we were lucky enough to see quite a few sightings. We didn't see any grizzlies, and we didn't get to see wolves, but lots of buffalo, lots of birds. And some bears. So they were a highlight for us.
When you go back to Australia, will this stimulate you to take a trip around Australia or do other things? You probably have had a fair contact with Australia in the Navy, but there you have to have a different sensitivity, because we don't have the drama of what you have here. The landscape here, especially in the Midwest, has good rain, has good soils, and then people came. So it's a richer country than Australia. There's very poor soils and not a lot of mountain ranges. Mount Kosciuszko is probably 7,000 feet.
So Australia's got some challenges at the moment, which is, anyone who says climate change isn't real, good on them. Australia had a number of years of really, really bad fires. And then when they were trying to get back on their feet, they had some really bad floods, which is a complete contrast from the many years that they were in drought. And it's great to get rain, but when you're not forecasting that much rain, it's not good. So things like re-establishing the eucalyptus trees that take years to grow for the koalas to sit in, that's a real problem there now. A lot of the wildlife was having to come out of the wildlife areas into the cities. A little town in the west of New South Wales, one of our East Coast states, was inundated by mice, because the mice that would normally live in the forest bush didn't have the bush to live in. There was no, the circle of, who do they eat to then be eaten sort of thing wasn't happening. So they came into the town. And that's just a sign of the aftermath of those sort of two highs and lows in respects to the fire and then flood. So it'll be interesting to see what some of those areas are like when we go back to them. The other piece that's happening in Australia is a lot of we only live around the outside normally of Australia. Half the middle of it you just can't live in. It's desert. There are some populations in the middle, but not much. We're pretty much around the end and around the outside. And as Dave said, if you put Australia over the top of the US, we're not the exact same shape, but we have a tip that pretty much hits LA, and we have another tip that pretty much hits New York. And so you've got all that land, and you only have about 26.5 million people. So it's not that many. But on those coastal areas, houses that would normally be very, very nicely propped up on the foreshore are all of a sudden having erosion and having to re-shore up their house because the water's rising and it's getting closer to where their properties are. So I think we'll find some changes when we go home. And because we've been away for a while, we might be a little bit more aware of them versus when you're living in it and it just sort of happens slowly, so you don't really acknowledge it. But even I notice it here. We've just had in DC or Wellington 2 really, really extraordinary, gorgeous, warm weeks. Now, this time when we arrived 4 years ago, we were down in the 12, 13s. It was cold. We were rugged up. You weren't outdoors. It was, and so now we've just had boiling hot weather compared to what we should do at this time of year. So just some things that we notice after living here for a while.
Where I grew up, at one stage, it was a little bit like the US and people going into rainfall areas that were too short. So the Australians tended to move into rainfall areas that were only 10 inches of rain. And it was not certain it would come in this year or in this month. And we had some dust storms. And I can remember the sun looked blue. Mm-hmm. And some of the soil was being picked up in New Zealand, 2,000 miles away. It's tremendous erosion. And in some of that happened here with Oklahoma and people moving out into in low rainfall areas.
Mm. Well, even the landscape we saw, particularly in places like Bryce and Arches, even Kent, like that's how gosh knows how many years of erosion to cause all that, and it's just you sort of can't get your head around. You think about lifespans and maybe the generation before and the generation before, that sort of thing, but to think of the significant years that that was once all rock at some point, and now it's a crafted arch just through natural circumstances is pretty cool. So I don't know how much Jackson sometimes was probably, can we get in the car and go now? But on the other side of the coin, I think he will take and remember a lot of this in. We have definitely tried to expose him to a lot of the culture, the lifestyle, the people in each state, because they're all different, to show him that, it's a big wide world. And that's sort of something we've tried to give him while we've been here.
The comparison between Black communities, yellow communities, and the Australian Aboriginal is quite different. The Australian Aboriginal is somewhat of a Stone Age person, a very clever Stone Age person that when living in the wild can survive with the wild. But the Indian population here is fairly well educated and much further ahead in terms of cultural development. The Aboriginal had nothing that could, they didn't have guns.
Yeah, they couldn't. There was nothing to give to the people who came, and so in turn they were just sort of taken over. But yeah, they didn't have weapons. They had spears to kill food. They weren't fighters as such.
They probably saved the early settlers in Port Jackson, which is Sydney, because there was not much food. But the Aboriginals knew how to do it, they would teach until they start to realize that their land was being taken over, and then it got to be more conflictual.
So it's gone a little bit. I wouldn't say it's 100% better, but it is very common now in Australia that if you are giving a presentation or speaking on behalf of Australia in any sort of international or even interstate cause, you acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. And in some cases, a lot of the land has been awarded back to the Aboriginal communities that are still existent. It's not completely gelling. There'll always be the challenges, but it's still a relative young country, and therefore there's a lot of focus on the history and what happened in the last 200 odd years, and so hopefully generations to come will learn that and be respectful of it and work within it versus trying to destroy it or get rid of it.
It's rather remote. My aunt, your great aunt Joan, used to live in Port Hedland, which is on the west coast of Western Australia, and she was matron of a flying doctor base, and that was interesting because the flying doctor would fly into a problem, pick up the person, and bring them back to the hospital. Eventually, the family moved to Alice Springs area.
To Tyndall, yeah.
And the children had to go to school in Queensland, so it was a 1,000-mile trip to go to high school, or you did things by correspondence.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's still the way. It's a little bit more populated in some of those areas now, but yeah, the role of flying doctors is a lot of people in rural communities in Australia wouldn't cope if it wasn't for having those services. So it's a different way of thinking about medicine and medical care and aid for people. We run a completely different medical system to what the US has. It's a little bit more in tune with what Canada's got and some of the other Commonwealth countries. Yeah, we've found that to be an interesting journey while we've been here as well. Not well, I'm not going to say better or worse, but it's definitely different to how we operate back home. But once you know the system and you understand it and you work and live here, well, then you operate within it because that's what it is. But yeah, I think going back to, there's going to be a lot of things I will miss from this side. High-speed internet and having things at the tip of our fingers, to then going back to Australia where an Amazon package might take a week. Now that's not a big deal, but when you've got used to having it at your fingertips, that is some sort of adjustment. So all first world problems, but some of the stuff that we've experienced while we've been here. But if you asked me, would I move over here and live again? For sure, in a heartbeat. Kieran quite regularly says, when's our next overseas position? That's my husband. And I don't know, who knows. We're going back to a location slightly inland of the coast, not too far. It's about 3 hours a drive, and
Canberra.
Yeah, just outside of Canberra, which is our version of Washington DC. So that's where government is, and a lot of the jobs that I sort of frequent. And yeah, it'll be nice. We'll be only 3 or 4 hours away from your sister and my sister, and so that'll. It's time to go and sort of hang out with the family a little bit, and then yeah, who knows where you'll see us next, or when you'll see us come through next.
Yes. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left, and I'd like to give a little time for Weft to advertise their not-for-profit organization. And
Perfect.
they appreciate that. And they've been going for 40 years. We've been in this situation for 40 years. You came when we had lost a warehouse, and you got involved in helping us get out of that warehouse. We still have a lot to do, but you're a good organizer, and that helps. We need that sort of person, and you've got to know some of the natural history that we have, which is prairie, which is not as interesting as forests or what you get out west with the eroded canyons and the like. It's more mundane, so you have to get used to microcosms. So if there's a difference in the landscape, it affects the water level and the humus level, and so you're looking at something rather different. Glaciers came down and left us with moraines when they melted in one place for many years, and so you have a little bit of terrain, but it's very, very flat. And most of Australia is flat too. If you're sitting in Albury, Hay Hill and Bilgong is very flat looking.
But the prairies have also got, I suppose, what struck me is how many species there are, and at in that springtime, the flowers and the blooms that they give, you put them all together, and they're really pretty. And I think it's a bit of a shame that people try and mow them and use the goodness of the soil. So you've managed to do some good in your area and turn some areas that were destined to be farmland or gosh knows what into now recreational space or protected area that will hopefully continue being that way into the generations. So you've dedicated your life to this, and I've had the opportunity to go around a number of different areas on various trips. So I really hope the pathways continue and someone helps you clean out that shed, that garage, warehouse.
We had a wonderful crew. And if anyone's listening out there and they want to help us get out of a warehouse, we're also looking for another warehouse because a lot of the materials that are there are useful for the future. So
yeah, there's a lot of tools that would be a complete waste if they had to be thrown out, and I'm sure if there was a worker bee or a planning session where 50 odd people came to help replant a prairie or pick one up and relocate it, the stuff Dave's secured over the years would be very helpful. So please, if anyone's listening, reach out to him and see what you can offer hand wise. I'd love to give a bit more time to it, but it just doesn't work at the moment. But who knows? I might take some time off in the future and just come back and clean some stuff up again for you, Dave.
Yes. Well, I think thank you for being Marilyn Tomlinson and enjoying the US. I think you've had a fun 4 years, and you're going to go back because if you stay much longer, you lose contact with the people who you know and love in Australia. So I think that's a sensible move. I've stayed here, but I miss my family in Australia. But I've been very glad to work with the technology that's here and the people that are here. And so it's a little bit yin and yang. It's how life sorts out. So this is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial. And thanks to Marilyn. Have a good trip home when you go.
Thanks, Dave. All the best.